I think a big part of building great products is being, again, like responsive to those moments and responsive to the context of what's going on, and knowing when a prototype is the right thing, knowing when like a lo-fi sketch is the right thing. Sometimes it's the right thing, even if the idea is in a very foggy state, to jump forward a year and produce something incredibly high fidelity that's like indistinguishable from the real thing. Over the arc of that process, I think like just changing the ways of working and having a kind of an intuition around what's the highest leverage design activity you can be doing. Typically, like with software or product or anything you're trying to build, there's some like end goal in mind. It's typically, I think ideally, it's not like the app. That is the answer. There's some other thing, like there's someone on the other end. So it's like, let's say you're building a fitness app. You want to connect people to a better version of themselves through exercise, something like that. Okay, then we're going to make a fitness app. And typically, the right solution or the right answers to those questions will kind of change over time and change over the time of the company, the life cycle of the company, and change as the user base grows and as the users grow. So, ideally, like the answer, the right design and technical answer is responsive to that evolution. So I enjoy less when someone has like a completely buttoned up 100% clear spec of this is exactly what we need, because then the design process is like fairly narrow and like prescribed. But the other half of it is I just find it produces better products and better solutions and answers when you focus on the question and let that sort of be the driver, as opposed to like, here's the answer, we need it produced in Figma. It also, just for me, it selects for the type of people that are open-minded and interested in not just using design to articulate the answer, but using design to like discover together what we're going to make.
If there's an example you're comfortable talking about from your work, I'd love to get like specific on sort of like a problem statement or a question that was given to you, and then actually what do you then go do as part of the design process?
At a high level, I think over the course of, if you take it from 0 to 1 or starting from scratch and getting something working in the market, working really well in the market, sometimes you see this like double diamond type of diagram. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's sort of, the phase of building something new through design. And it kind of describes two phases of divergence and convergence. That's like where the double diamond comes in. This is in like every design textbook. Okay. And it's described various ways, but one kind of colloquial way it's talked about is the first phase is make the right thing, meaning use design to figure out what the right thing is to make. And the second phase is make the thing right, meaning make it extremely good, like do it perfectly, execute it perfectly. Okay. And the various, activities that you might engage in are just very different over the arc of that phase, meaning it may be that early in the process, it's less important to make super, high fidelity prototypes. It's more important to be like using words and documents or like lo-fi sketches, etc. So one of the challenges I see with my clients or just with other companies is you develop ways of working over time, over your career at different companies, and sometimes you might take like a big company way of working where everything's articulated through decks, and you go back to a startup and you realize like my way of working it's not flying. And the reverse is true. Like I actually think earlier in my career I definitely, since I come from like a technology background into design, I have a very like maker's bias, and like a bias towards the way great things get made is through actually like coding software and interface design, not through decks. And I definitely have learned over my career, like partially from witnessing at different sizes of clients, like a respect for like how critically important it is at certain phases to articulate something super crisply, turn the work into a story. And so, yeah, I think I've just over time gained like an appreciation for how hard and necessary that aspect is. I am independent, so I work with clients, and there's a sense in which, I'm embedded, so it's like I'm an employee, but there's a certain client service dynamic to it. And I think people, even if you're a full-time employee, there's a client service dynamic because you work with people, and people have a certain psychology. And it's one thing to say, well, I'm just going to do the best job and everyone will see my brilliance and take all my ideas, but you need to bring people along with you. And I think part of it is just understanding the highest leverage design artifact but part of it is just understanding people and how the specific person, how they think, what is persuasive to them. Like, to take the New York Times example, a lot of the folks that we were working with were not, design and technology people. They're editors, either like writers or they're audio editors. And, you just discover over time hearing them talk, oh, okay, they think in stories, basically. Not to be too reductive about it, but they think in like the arc, like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. That's the way that something should be articulated. So that could be a deck, or it could just be, it's just the prototype design artifact, but the way you talk through it should have like a linearity to it and a continuity to it. There are other people who are more like analytics oriented. They think in like funnels, conversion. People who are more oriented around language, like the project I'm working on now, the main client, like the CEO, is just, she's a brilliant writer, and it's like language and emotion. Those are the two primary ingredients that I think she's always keyed on to. So even if you're reviewing like a functional spec, those are kind of like the words and the way to convey like the critical aspects of the work is like language and emotion.
For the New York Times project, like what was your process? How did you prototype that thing, and then what did it look like to iterate?
In that case, the brief was like an audio front page for the Times. You have the physical paper front page, you have the New York Times app that has the front page, and there's so much editorial and design care and scrutiny that goes into those. And so the mandate was essentially to conceive of and build the audio version of that for the Times. And that's like pretty open-ended as a brief. It could go a lot of different ways. And that aspect, and the fact that, like I said, the people we were working with, the broader team, was not a homogenous team of like engineers and designers and writers. It was like broader editorial people, publishers, people who produce audio shows for the Times, people who are involved in like curation, etc. So that definitely informed the types of design processes and design artifacts we use. So for example, like a couple of the things we did, you have your traditional sort of like Crazy Eights design sprint type of template where people are supposed to sketch. Well, some people aren't sketchers, like I said, they're oriented around like words. So tailoring those activities to making sure it's not just like drawing oriented, it might just be like a headline. Even, figuring out what the set of components that, for the Times, the audio app, it's supposed to be responsive to the news. So the news on a given day, obviously the content changes, but the shape of it might change as well. Like think of the front page. You might have a huge takeover headline like Yankees, So you have to figure that out. And the way you figure that out is not through like messing around in Figma. You have to have someone actually sketch and program, okay, well, what would it look like today, the next day, and you start to like conceive of, okay, this is the set of components that we might need to be responsive to the changing landscape of the news, changing landscape of programming, and then basically starting to play that back to them. Okay, I'm going to show you something now. I'm going to show you a prototype of what I think we're hearing from you. How does this look? And that might be like mid-fidelity wireframes, just something internal. That's where it's usually a good opportunity to also kind of like bring engineering into the fold. And we're not ready to go into production yet. So in the kind of like double diamond scheme, we're still in this first diamond where we're figuring out make the right thing. But still you do want to ask questions like, okay, if we did something like this, like what's the rough data model? Like how often is this going to be updated? What if someone goes away and comes back? And you're just sort of like figuring out together the Venn diagram of like what's possible, like desirable, feasible. Usually at some point there is this kind of convergence where we feel confident that we've explored a sufficient amount of the problem space and sniffed out a lot of the good ideas, seen how they fit together, and there seems to be like a sense of consensus that we're on the right track. That's usually a good time, like I mentioned, to kind of like jump way into the future, basically like skip all of the production steps of like making all the little widgets pixel perfect and just make one prototype that feels exactly like what the end product will be just for like one day. So for that, we would produce like a really high fidelity prototype. We would sometimes even like get the audio produced for us, of like a show that doesn't exist yet, plug all that together, and you can basically have a version of the experience in your hand, maybe even a year before it's ready. That also speaks to, on a different topic, like to me, when you think about like what makes great digital products, great products in general, I think the ones that are really the most challenging to make and the most, satisfying are ones that involve things like other than code and design. So like in this case, it involves an entire production pipeline. Like if you want to make a headlines show, that means a team is going to have to like script and produce that show every single day. There needs to be a CMS that they like put that into. There's a human like curatorial aspect to it also. And all of those people need to be aligned on the thing that you're building. And so, for me, I'm drawn both as like a consumer and a designer to things that have that real world element to it,
You mentioned the editorial people or like the people who are uploading the file into the CMS or whatever. Are those people that the product team interface with to kind of get aligned? And how does that process work?
I think that one really important aspect of that is being, I keep using the word sensitive, but being sensitive to just even the vibe in the room and how like these meetings are conducted. So you can imagine so many forms it can take. It can be, you're trying to have a meeting to solicit input from these people who are not designers and engineers. So that can feel like an interview. It could feel like a design crit where you said, oh, okay, well, we know how to do a design crit, so let's just ask the editors to come in and give feedback. But they may have never seen a meeting like this before. It could take the form of, triaging, like prioritizing things. What's most important to you? Just trying to make sure that you don't just try to yank someone into your process. You need to sort of like meet them where they're at, like, and have a sensitivity to how do they typically, in whatever it is they do, let's say they're an audio editor, what's their creative process like? Maybe we can come fit into that with a digital product. That's what we tried to do in a lot of ways with the New York Times project, and even down to like people who are audio editors or on the audio team. They may have interface and product ideas, but they might actually just be more oriented towards like great content ideas, like a headline show, or like there was an idea for a show that's around the table at Thanksgiving and like it could be anything, but they're going to come up with a great content idea. Someone else might have the great like product idea to come with it, but if the medium for having those discussions is like, let's sit around a Figma and talk about what we're looking at, you can't get a great idea for an audio show from that. Or, let's say like a hypothetical idea of like, let's say it's during the election, like dispatch updates throughout the day, like short audio clips from the field. Okay, what would be a great interface to support that? Maybe it's like Instagram stories. But you need to try to find the right medium and language and environment to get the types of ideas that are not, not strictly like design and technology ideas. So. Even down to like when we were doing those exercises, like the worksheets that we made for people to take notes, like, again, it's not just boxes to fill in an interface idea. It would be like, what's the name of the show? What's the emotional tenor of the show? What's the cadence on which it's released? And, a couple of the shows that are now produced and like live in the New York Times audio app came from that process. I think it's also part of the job. I'm speaking strictly from a design lens. Like when you get input or feedback on design work, it's really the job of the designer, I think, to do a lot of work to interpret that feedback and try to understand, like, not just what was said, but like what is actually being expressed here. And that can go back to like, oh, maybe it was a visual comment, but what's being communicated below that is like an emotional piece of feedback. Or like it's actually a piece of feedback about sequence, but that's not exactly how it was expressed. So yeah, ways that it sometimes goes wrong, I think just not having that type of like fluidity and flexible appreciation. Also just not appreciating enough that, again, there's other people either on the team or out in the world or adjacent that are going to be required to make something like truly great, whether that's like support, sales, operations, editing. I think that like the products that I see out there in the world and have like a big appreciation for, let's say that the end result of it, if you look at the product surface area, you might actually be able to design it in like 2 days. Like, oh, I see exactly how it is. I can go over here and replicate it. Look, there's the product I designed. And that's kind of that like iceberg metaphor where you realize, oh, actually like the hardest part is all the stuff underneath it that makes the machine go and makes the end experience great. So I think not realizing that is a way that things go wrong, where you say like, how hard can it be? Look at how the app looks. We can make one just like that. Yeah. And not realizing everything else that goes into it.
Can you tell us a little bit about like your state of mind as you go through the process of iterating on your own designs?
There's kind of like that maybe it relates to clock time and calendar time. There's like macro iteration, meaning you have to crank the whole thing. We're going to update the design, we're going to build the design, we're going to change the way we talk about it slightly, we're going to get it out in the world and do an entire crank. And that's what I think, is truly the process of iterating on product. Then there's just like little micro iterations, which is like in the course of a week or a day, let me try this, let me try that. And that's kind of, that's, or if you want to think about it in a kitchen analogy, that's all stuff that's happening back of house. Like no customer ever sees that. With that stuff, I try to be as, casual and low ego as possible. I even try to run quote unquote design reviews in a very, like bring a sense of authority and perspective to it, but keep it very low key and casual and present things as they are, which is like, I've thought about this a decent amount. Here's a stab at the way it could be. Also framing, like, here's what I'm hoping to get out of this discussion, which is it might just be a gut check. It might just be, I'm actually hoping to get out other ideas I haven't considered. I'm actually looking to get like critical feedback on tone. So kind of try to set that up front, but really put people at ease that there's like a broad set of solutions we might consider. What's shown here, again, these are just drawings. It's just a few drawings. Sometimes I'll even bring in like, here's a bunch of other stuff I did. I ended up chopping it off. We might go over there later and just keep it very like organic and fluid, because that's what, I've found. You might think that you have a good fluid relationship with someone who's giving feedback, but not realize how clammed up they are and not realize how they feel like they don't have a license to give certain feedback about something that they couldn't make themselves. So I also think, it's really helpful. I hear this all the time. For me, I love, my favorite types of clients are someone who has like a deep expertise in some lane that's not design or technology. So like for Mirror, that was fitness. For Kernel, it's like the restaurant world. For the New York Times, it's like editorial and audio production. But they have like an appreciation and understanding for what great design and technology can do. Those types of people, I find, even if they have achieved great things in their life, they feel very uncomfortable and unqualified to give design feedback. And they almost always say, I'm not a designer, but, and I have found if you like pull those people aside and tell them like, I really, really value your feedback. Here's something you said to me the other day that really improved the design. I want you to know that I'm getting like emotional talking about it. It really counts for so much. Like people really realize, oh, I guess my reactions and my comments like really do matter, and exactly as I deliver them, even if it's just like framed in emotional language or business language or analytics language. And again, it's the job of the designer to like hear that and understand, oh, okay, this is what she's talking about. I can go over here.
Are there key go-to questions that you ask yourself or the team between attempts or during the iteration process that inform kind of the next try?
Yeah, it depends on, the shape of the product and the shape of the audience, but, typically, especially if something is consumer oriented, what you're really looking for, especially in an early version of a product, it can't get everything right. So I'm very immune to like feedback of the type, I really, really like it, but this specific thing is wrong, and that's a deal breaker for me. Well, it doesn't matter because we can do that later. I'm really interested in trying to hear if, I'm also immune to, yeah, I really like this. I think I would use it. Useless. I'm really looking for like a core set of people who truly love it and are so effusive in their feedback or in their use if it's like a demo that it would be very painful for them if it was taken away. And that's, typically what I'm looking for, what you're looking for. You also need to be very careful about like negative feedback you may receive that it could almost steer you away from the right thing. Like you picture like a treasure hunt, you're almost there and you've almost uncovered it, but someone says, well, actually, I think it could be over here. And you almost had it, but someone gave negative feedback. Maybe that person wasn't even your customer. Maybe they didn't even get what you were trying to do. So, you have to be careful not to get steered away also. It's definitely become, I've become more sensitive and aware of that over time. Like one of the things I always say in terms of what I'm looking for in projects to take on is, I like working on things that normal people care about and understand, meaning you go to a dinner party and someone asks, oh, what were you working on? I like having an answer that someone can say, oh, that's interesting. I have one of those, or I actually know of another one. So like, the New York Times or the restaurant I just worked on. Everyone goes to restaurants and likes restaurants. If it's like a third-party API plugin that writes your documentation schema, it's sort of that's cool. Like I think that's very interesting personally, but most people don't have a connection to that. And I think to me, part of like being a designer is existing in the world of real people. So I like working on things that normal people care about. And I think it also just speaks to there is a real, I think, danger for people who, for me, like I came up through technology and writing code into design, and I love software and I love technology and I love design. So I could talk about it all day. I love doing it. It's like a privilege that I get to do it every day. But again, it's not, it doesn't connect to people unless you do something for them, whether that's like helping them achieve something or helping them feel something or helping them improve something. So again, until you do that, you are just kind of drawing pictures. And I could geek out all day about like design systems and components and Figma and linear and all these different things that are kind of inside baseball to our industry. I just find it personally interesting, but there is a real risk of kind of falling into the trap of thinking like that's what it's all about. That's the work. And so, yeah, I think trying to keep a perspective on what this is all supposed to be aimed at that's what keeps me, kind of in check and trying to focus on like spending my time in useful ways. And I think it's a good gut check. Like if I walked out, it's 5 p.m. If I walked out of my office and explained to someone, my neighbor, what I did all day, are they gonna think that made any sense? And I think people can understand, like, yeah, I did a little drawing here, then I went and talked to someone about it and I got feedback. But if I said I spent all day doing an activity that they can't understand or have any connection to, you might be a bit disconnected from like the work that's actually gonna ultimately get there.